All right, 10 past the hour here at Moscow. The full text of the confidential US-NATO response to Russia's security concerns has, of course, been leaked. The purported document was published by the Spanish newspaper El País.
All states should respect the right of other states to choose or change security arrangements and to decide their own future and foreign policy free from outside interference. In this light, we reaffirm our commitment to NATO's open-door policy under Article 10 of the Washington Treaty.
We have, of course, requested comment from both NATO and the US State Department. But if we take just this document, it seems that it is an open and shut case for them. They will not compromise. That is despite Vladimir Putin warning that this is a very reckless disregard of Russia's concerns. It's not well thought out because don't people realize that this could potentially set all nations involved down a very dangerous path of no return?
Listen carefully to what I say. In Ukraine's own doctrinal documents, it is written that they plan to return Crimea, including by military means. That is not what they say publicly. Imagine for yourself that Ukraine and NATO members will begin military operations in Crimea. What do? Go to war with the NATO bloc? Has anyone thought about that? Ignoring our concerns, the US and NATO refer to the right of states to freely choose how to ensure their security. But it's not just about giving someone this right. After all, this is only one part of the well-known formula for the indivisibility of security. The second integral part says that one should not allow the strengthening of anyone's security at the expense of the security of other states.
So the Russian leader is asking, why must we sacrifice our security so that someone else can feel safe?
All right, let's learn a little bit more here on the programme on RT. There's Patrick Henningsen, the executive editor of the news website 21stcenturywire.com. Great website. Appreciate the work there, Patrick. What's your view now on this latest leaked document from the US and NATO? I mean, do you see it as an outright rejection of Russia's demands, or is perhaps there a little bit of wriggle room involved?
Well, it's, they're not getting a written guarantee. This is what Moscow wants about NATO's advancement eastward. But, the likelihood of the Ukraine's entry into NATO, it's not practically possible at this moment. And it's unlikely to really qualify for entry into the alliance for many years, if not decades, because it requires a consensus among NATO member states, which is currently impossible as it stands today. But on the positive side, they're passing papers back and forth. There's dialogue. This is generally positive. But again, the long-term concerns of Moscow are pretty clear, and this is going to have to be resolved in some way eventually.
Patrick, as you say, there's perhaps a bit of positivity here, a bit of optimism when you talk about the sides involved. Essentially, they are agreeing to put these papers back and forth and have a discussion between each other. But maybe I'm being too optimistic here. But in one possible concession, the document says the US might be willing to strike a deal with Russia on missile deployments in Europe. Do you think we could read something into that? Is that a good sign?
Well, the strategic arms control issue, that's very positive, actually. Well, this is something that Russia wants to nail down and has done for quite some time, especially since the United States has kind of withdrawn from most of the major missile arrangements that were previously Cold War arrangements, effectively. But so this is generally good. However, what the U.S. wants to achieve within those deals is another story altogether. Again, this could last a long time if they are to really negotiate, and it will most likely include other countries that want to package this in as a broader international agreement as well. But, the main problem here is NATO and the U.S., what they've tried here is very clever. They want to get power or influence over Russia's military movements inside of its own borders. And, that's not going to happen. So they've already played that card, and I think that's sort of pushed the situation to where we are in terms of negotiations. But the West, the credibility is waning just merely on the basis of the hysteria of talking up this imminent invasion over the last 2 months.
Well, as you know, the idea of Ukraine potentially joining NATO has been floated really since, going back to 2008. That was with the conversation I had recently with Karen Kneissl, the former foreign minister of Austria. What do you think, though? Let me ask you this, Patrick, because what do you think NATO's true intentions are with Ukraine? If it's agreed upon, let's say, in a speculative manner, that Ukraine's never going to join NATO, then what is the whole point of all of this that's happening right now? You alluded to it just a moment ago.
Well, the real loser here is actually the Ukraine, if you really look at it. The West are guilty of making totally hysterical, false claims from foreign ministry pulpits to the mainstream media, inventing intelligence that Russia's going to invade imminently. And this is basically a geopolitical ruse. And it's been completely unnecessary. It's put the world on war footing, but it's actually cost Ukrainians dearly already in terms of economic fallout. And one could argue that this geopolitical ruse, as it were, spearheaded by the U.S., by Britain, and NATO bureaucrats in tow, has already damaged Ukraine economically to the equivalent of, let's say, punitive economic sanctions would. So, they've already created a negative situation with regards to Ukraine. So I don't know if that's actually going to bode well for the NATO conversation long term in Kiev. I think that's still yet to be known.
Well, as you say, I mean, it was interesting you said just a moment ago with essentially the Ukrainian President Zelensky, he came out asking for calm. He was telling the US and particularly the UK media, stop it. You're making the situation worse. You're rallying up this war cry. And as you said, Patrick, a moment ago, the economic effect of that on Ukraine has been very, very bad. No one wants to invade in a country, invest in a country, if you've got all these other countries saying that there's going to be some sort of invasion there. I wanted to ask you, so you've got all these different parties involved, NATO members, America, Russia, of course, England, Boris Johnson with all his Partygate scandal, he's getting very involved these days. Who do you think stands to benefit from the current escalation in Ukraine, Patrick?
Well, the main beneficiary has to be NATO. It has to be NATO. And, NATO's been struggling for relevance in recent years. And that's one of the reasons why they're very keen to sort of ramp up a crisis. Not only that, if NATO is becoming irrelevant, that's a major concern for Washington, because NATO has always served as the sort of glove in which Washington can insert its hand into European military affairs, but also broadly Eurasian affairs. Look at Afghanistan as an example. So, if Europe transitions to a European defense or defense union, as it has been doing for the last 10 to 15 years, gradually, most recently with the PESCO agreement, if NATO's on the rocks, then basically that cuts Washington more or less out of sort of direct influence and direct really power over the sort of the geopolitical lines of Europe and more broadly Eurasia as well. So I'd say NATO is the beneficiary of this crisis, and Washington and Britain as well. Where Washington goes, Britain is there side by side. You can absolutely be sure about that.
Patrick Henningsen, the executive editor of the news website 21stcenturywire.com, a great website. Appreciate your work there, Patrick, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.